It's 2022 and the announcement trailer for the Callisto Protocol drops. For Dead Space fans like myself, it was such a great moment. We were all hyped. It was the pure unfiltered kind of stuff. Glen Schofield, the genius behind Dead Space, and his team at Striking Distance Studios with veterans from Dead Space promised a next-gen survival horror experience that would resurrect the genre's visceral thrills. Come the day when it launches, I finally sat down to play, and I saw the cracks. You had the technical hiccups, the repetitive combat, the bugs, but let me tell you, this game, in my opinion, after it's been fixed, is still the best mid-tier horror game I have ever played. And by mid-tier, I mean games that don't refine the genre, like Resident Evil 4 or Dead Space, but deliver a focused, bloody, terrifying experience. So we're going to look at the story, the gore, the glitches, and to show why the Callisto Protocol is a must-play for horror fans, despite some critics and players calling this game boring or a snooze fest. The Callisto Protocol was hyped as the unofficial spiritual successor to Dead Space by fans and critics alike, and it's easy to see why. It was developed by Striking Distance Studios with, as mentioned previously, Glen Schofield at the helm. And this game had big shoes to fill in a genre thriving with hits like Resident Evil Village, Signalis and Tormented Souls, not to mention the upcoming at that time Dead Space and Silent Hill 2 remakes. The Callisto Protocol throws you into a sci-fi horror nightmare on Jupiter's moon, Callisto, in the year 2320. You play Jacob Lee, a cargo pilot portrayed by Josh Duhamel, who's hauling mysterious goods when his ship is attacked by Danny Nakamura, who is played by Karen Fukuhara, which many of you probably know. She plays as Kimiko in The Boys. And she, in Callisto Protocol, is with her terrorist group, The Outer Way. After a crash landing, Jacob's falsely imprisoned in Black Iron Prison, a hellhole run by the shady United Jupiter Company, UJC, not to be confused with Dead Space USG. Suddenly, a bioweapon outbreak turns inmates into grotesque biophage monsters, and Jacob's stuck, fighting to escape alongside Danny and a bro-tier inmate, Elias. The story kicks off with a terrorist attack on Europa, another moon, and spirals into a mystery about what Jacob was transporting and why the prison's overrun. Now, there are not going to be any major spoilers in this because I want you guys to experience it if you do have any interest in it, so there's not going to be any major spoilers. Also, I want to touch on this. I'll be honest, the story isn't very groundbreaking. It's the familiar sci-fi horror trope, a shady corporation, a mysterious outbreak, and a desperate escape. We've seen this multiple times. We see that with Resident Evil with the Umbrella Corporation, and you have the desperate escaping. So that's what it lacks in originality. But what it lacks in originality, it makes up in execution. The writing, the production quality, and the performance are top notch, and the visuals are beautiful. They are truly crisp and look worthy of a next gen or 9th gen title. They are superb.
Because it's just, Lil Wayne's just too good. It's just,
Josh Duhamel's Jacob is an absolute unit. I mean, this guy is like soon bashing and boxing grunts or biophages like it's just another day at the office, and he just got into the prison. Karen Fukuhara's Danny adds intrigue, though she is absent for most of the first 2/3 of the game, which is a crime because she was a highlight in things like The Boys, and I would have liked to see a lot more of her. And then there is Sam Witwer's Captain Ferris. Now, Sam Witwer, as some of you will probably recognize him, is Deacon St. John from Days Gone, and I'm so glad we get to sort of see the actor back again. And in the Callisto Protocol, he's the prison's antagonistic warden, but he's also another missed opportunity because he has a good sort of like start to the game. He's a jerk from the jump, but only shows up a few times. And I was thinking, like, if he was something like a doctor, like a Nemesis or Mr. X from Resident Evil type villain, and he stalks you through the prison, that would be really cool, and that had so much potential. But they didn't do it anyways. But still, the story kept me hooked, even if the pacing does stumble. And I'd rate it as 7.5 out of 10 for its engaging setup and graphical characters. For extra lore, don't sleep on the Helix Station podcast. So this is a 6-part prequel following a skip tracer hunting an escaped criminal on a derelict space station. It has pretty good voice acting and a creepy vibe, and its 3-hour runtime builds out Callisto's world pretty nicely. I listened before playing and it fleshed out the Black Iron's horrors really well. Let's talk about what the Callisto Protocol absolutely nails: its atmosphere and its visuals. The game is a visual feast with the next-gen graphics that create an inescapable hellhole vibe. From the water reflections to lens flare to fog and uncanny valley facial animations, the environmental detail is stunning. There's a sequence where you're trudging through a blizzard, barely able to see as a thunderstorm rages in the distance. It's perfection. It's so
It's just, oh.
mangled corpses, gruesome notes scrawled in blood, and the sheer violence of it all. The game definitely earns its mature 17 rating. Jacob gets covered in blood after fights and wades through sewers are full of, well, let's just say, mess. Kind of feels like browsing Twitter on a bad day. What am I talking about? Every day is a bad day on Twitter. The gore, next level. Jacob gets drenched in blood after fights, and the death animations are splendiferous bloodbaths. Picture his eyes gouged out, limbs sliced off, his jaw or head ripped out apart in like one motion. There's like one dead straight out of The Last of Us where a bloater tears Joel's face in half. These executions are so over the top, they're almost comical. They did not hold back on the violence, and I'm glad they didn't, because I'm somebody who gets really scared very quickly, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I actually went out of my way to die way too many times just to see all the death animation. The atmosphere and the visuals make every moment tense, proving Callisto's a mid-tier gem that nails the horror vibe. Absolutely. Now let's get into the actual flesh of the game, no pun intended. The gameplay. The Callisto Protocol leans heavily into melee combat. This is where it both shines and stumbles. You start with a shiv, then I think later you upgrade to a crowbar, then you further upgrade to a stun baton, to a kinetic hammer, and later you can also have a B155 pistol. Combat is simple. Hold left or right to dodge enemy swings, hold back to block, and counter with standard or heavy attacks. Now dodging kind of looks funny when you keep on dodging because he's just moving left to right, left to right. You stun an enemy and a weak point icon pops up for extra damage with your guns. You have the GRP glove, a nod to Dead Space Kinesis module. It lets you grab enemies or objects and hurl them into spike fans or off ledges. My favorite moment? Yeeting a biofedge into a fan and watching it explode into chunks of bloodied flesh. Pure chaos. The sound effects and design are crunchy, the hits feel impactful, and there's a real sense you're messing these monsters up. But there's cracks that show up. The melee system is shallow. You're locked onto an enemy, losing situational awareness, which makes multiple enemies a nightmare. Off-screen attacks are frequent and dodging doesn't require timing. You just hold left or right, which makes boss fights laughingly quite easy. Switching between guns and baton is painfully slow, and the animation delay is maddening. It drives me nuts. With only 5 weapons, a hand cannon, shotgun, automatic pistol, riot gun, and assault rifle attachment, gunplay feels limited, and swapping attachment mid-fight I would say is kinda impractical. So I got swarmed by about 3 enemies because I couldn't swap my shotgun fast enough. Talk about frustrating. And the combat gets repetitive after a couple of hours. Sometimes it's just like too much of the same action. And dodging is basically just shifting right to left or left to right instead of dropping and rolling in the direction you want, making that particular mechanic especially repetitive. Though the Callisto Protocol does feature guns, I don't think they are the primary focus. The game emphasizes melee combat and survival horror elements, with firearms being secondary weapons. And you can find firearms like the hand cannon, skunk gun, riot gun, tactical pistol, and assault rifle, each with their own unique characteristics and upgrade paths. One of my favorite mechanics though is that they have the iconic Dead Space stomp. It's back. Every corpse is a blood-filled piñata, and stomping crates for loot feels so satisfying. You've got the diegetic UI like Dead Space, and it shows the health and GRP energy on Jacob's neck from the black iron prison tracker he got drilled into him. Healing is a little slow, taking 3 to 4 seconds to jab a syringe, so don't even try in combat. It's a death warrant, especially on higher difficulties. These mechanics borrow heavily and remind me of The Last of Us with Joel and his heavy hitters, and deliberate pacing. Callisto Protocol on the hardest difficulty, every fight I felt was more challenging and felt well balanced with the difficulty of the challenge that I loved. Though I should mention, if you do play on the higher difficulties, the ammo and inventory space are scarce, forcing tough resource management decisions. I wish there was like a backpack or more upgrade options. You do get an inventory upgrade later on in the story, increasing your slots to 12. However, this upgrade isn't available until partway through a later chapter. So I would rate the weapons and inventory a 7 out of 10. Fun, but held back by the lack of variety. The enemies in the Callisto Protocol are a mixed bag. Most are the standard grunts that you meet, and they rush you. With some variety, projectile spitting monsters, you have the invisible spider-like ones, and exploding suicide enemies. The mutation mechanic where enemies evolve like, I don't know, Pokemon sounds cool, but just that makes them faster and tougher, but not tactically different. Compare that to something like Resident Evil 4, where shooting off their head could spawn a scythe-wielding Las Plagas. Callisto's mutations feel tame. The two-headed mini-boss, creatively named but you'll never guess it. Two-head, absolute banger writing. A hulking is a bullet sponge and it's an absolute slog to fight. You dodge left and right and you chip away with shots and repeat for about 2 to 3 minutes. It reappears about 3 or 4 times, I can't remember. By the end I was rolling my eyes at the recycled design. Bosses get a 5 out of 10, total lack of variety. Enemies overall, an 8 out of 10 for their creepy design and placement, but they definitely needed more diversity. Now if you were looking for smart, clever puzzles that made you think, like Resident Evil 4 or Resident Evil 3 with the clock tower, you're not going to find that here. Puzzles are a low point. They boil down to pick up, fuse, put in a slot, turn crank, done. It's so basic, it's almost reductive. Dead Space had environmental puzzles that made you think. Callisto just wants you to progress. Stealth sections, especially with blind enemies, are equally frustrating. Jacob's crouch walking is glacial, like barely nudging the thumbsticks. The AI is maddeningly inconsistent, like randomly doing before 180s. I think they fixed that, but it was hilarious to see that. But also, there are the blind enemies that hilariously hit every single step, but ignore you when you're shanking their body or stomping a corpse. Once detected, they just rush you, making stealth feel pointless. Still, there's exploration if you want, and it rewards you with side rooms like with health pickups and credits for upgrading Jacob's gear, like alt-fire's melee blocks and weapon damage. Nothing too crazy, but it's worth it if you want to try something different. So we've talked a little about the gameplay, we've talked about the mechanics, we've talked about the story, but let's talk about the elephant in the room when this game first released. The Callisto Protocol launch in December 2022 was a disaster. PC players, even with rigs like an i7 1070, 64GB RAM and RTX, blah blah, etc., it faced stuttering and frame rate drops in the 20s and 30s due to shader compilation issues. Glen Schofield called it a clerical error with an erroneous patch, and Denuvo's anti-piracy might have played a role. Like seriously, I do not know why these companies use such a shitty anti-piracy thing as Denuvo. It's literally the worst. The Xbox Series X missed ray trace reflections and quality mode, while the PS5 held a steady 30 FPS, and surprisingly, even though it still had crashes and combat dips, it played significantly better compared to the Xbox and PC versions. Last gen consoles PS4 and Xbox One were stripped back with lower resolution, no ray tracing, and a 30 FPS cap. Striking Distance Studios did about 6 months of patches. The first update fixed PC stuttering and subsequent patches optimized performance across platforms, and then they added ray tracing reflections for the Xbox Series X and fixed the PS4 crashes. Combat got some love too. You got faster reload and healing animations, better camera angles to spot incoming attacks, and reduced off-screen hits. So now you're less likely to get swarmed now, although it still happens sometimes. They added New Game Plus, they're letting you carry over weapons and upgrades. Now, this is a concept I do not understand. When you buy a game on launch day, you should get New Game Plus already on the game. Like, what? I don't understand why it has to come in a later update or patch. Like, let me know down in the comments if you agree with that. But anyway, they also added a hardcore mode with tougher enemies and fewer drops. There was dismemberment mode for easier limb chopping and cutscene skipping. Mind blowing that it wasn't there at launch, honestly. Performance isn't perfect still, PCs still at times fluctuate, so I'd say stick to moderate settings, but it's night and day better. PS5's quality mode looks pretty stunning, and the haptic feedback makes every swing feel weighty and trigger feel satisfying, which is kind of sweet. At least these updates turned a broken launch into a polished mid-tier game, making it far more playable and enjoyable. After launch, the Callisto Protocol also got a season pass with 4 DLC packs. There was the Outer Way skin at $4.99. It's a rip-off. It's just a cosmetic armor set they could have just made into a collectible item you just buy or with the in-game currency. I wouldn't recommend it. Then there's the Contagion bundle. Adds a brutal permadeath mode, a new skin and more death animations, but locking animations behind the paywall feels stingy. They should have just included it in the base game. The Riot bundle includes a horde mode called Riot, 11 new enemy death animations, and Prospector skin collection. Riot mode is a wave-based mode set in a previously unexplored area of Black Iron Prison where players fight increasingly difficult enemies, and you earn credits to upgrade weapons and resources, and you compete for high scores. It's decent, and it costs $9.99. The Final Transmission DLC, now this is the big one, is the 3-4 hour story expansion. So spoiler warning for the base game. Stop here and skip to when I say spoilers ended in the timestamp. So it picks up after Jacob sends Danny off in an escape pod with Dr. Mahale, guiding him back through Black Iron to find another ship. It leans hard into psychosis themes. Jacob's implant triggers voices and visions. And there are new enemies like the Biobot, a powerful new weapon, varied environment at spice, though tedious vent sections do persist. The conclusive ending, however, should have been in the main game. Locking behind a paywall is a sin. Like, it's kind of scummy that they did that. Still, at a discounted price, it's worth it for fans. Normal price is $15 or $14.99, whatever, and I'm still fucking annoyed that they locked this one off though. Retail skins are separate and underwhelming. These DLCs boost replayability, especially Riot and Final Transmission, but they don't fix the game's core issue, and it's the repetition. But that's kind of to be expected. Striking Distance Studios wasn't about to give it the Cyberpunk 2077 treatment with a complete gameplay overhaul. So I've given my thoughts on this, and it asks the question, why is the Callisto Protocol the best mid-tier horror game I have ever played? It's certainly not perfect, combat is repetitive, puzzles are basic, and the story is derivative, depends on each person, and it's not genre-defining masterpieces like Dead Space or Resident Evil 4, but it nails the essentials of survival horror in my opinion. The atmosphere is unmatched with fantastic level designs and environmental storytelling that immerses you in Black Iron's hell. The melee combat, while shallow, feels intimate, and the claustrophobic setting sets it apart from Dead Space's range focus. On the hardest difficulty, every fight feels like a life or death struggle, amplifying the tension. Once panicked in a room full of scalable objects, watched the AI climb like lunatics while I picked them off, it was chaotic, but thrilling. The visuals are drop dead gorgeous, and are one of the highest qualities I have ever seen, and if you're playing on PS5, the DualSense haptic feedback makes every hit feel really visceral. Post-patch game, the game runs smoothly, enough to enjoy its strength, and around $38, it's a steal for a 10-hour adventure. Compared to like titans like the Dead Space remake that has already come out, it's not as ambitious or polished. It doesn't innovate as much as it imitates, with clear nods to Dead Space, as mentioned, with the UI, the curb stomping, the explosive canisters. But if we overlook the Dead Space influence and Glen Schofield as one of the creators as well as Dead Space veterans that made the Callisto Protocol, we have ourselves a solid, tense, visually stunning experience of survival horror. The lack of New Game Plus at launch and the paywall true ending kinda sting still, but the core game's strength I think outweigh these flaws, plus DLC for this game fluctuates to lower prices. The Callisto Protocol is a flawed but a fantastic mid-tier horror game. Play on the hardest difficulty, it's the best way. Use every combat trick, dodge, stomp, and definitely give the Helix podcast a chance. Overall, I would give this game a solid 8.5 out of 10. I don't agree with all the harsh reviews. It's not a snooze fest, nor is it boring for horror fans, but it's a bloody good time. But here's my favorite part of the video, and that's asking you my views. What do you think about this? Did you play the Callisto Protocol at launch, and what did you think about it? And tell me your funniest moments when you experienced bugs and glitches. Have you played it more recently, or would you recommend it to somebody who hasn't played it and definitely should give it a go? So drop your thoughts in the comments below, ring the bell notification, subscribe, and I'll see you next time. And don't forget to like. Chickadeus, signing out. Peace.